Alright, so for this video I'm going to be talking to you about writing and targeting application letters. So the application letter was a very important traditional component of the job application, but it's somewhat being eclipsed now. So there are competing schools of thought about how important application letters are nowadays. In some fields they remain standard. So all of the academic job applications that I'm doing require a cover letter. It's a standard component that you always want to incorporate. However, a lot of non-academic jobs are shifting away from requiring it and are requiring more just a resume nowadays. But this video is going to teach you some of the techniques that you want to use when you're structuring your application letter. So one thing I want to initially sort of point your attention to, we'll be taking a closer look at this sample application letter. One thing you want to notice right off the bat is that this is set up in proper business letter format, with both the heading, with the sender's address and the date, the recipient's address and a salutation, and then at the bottom we have a signature line with the closing, the signature, and then the author's name printed. So that's the format you're going to want to use for your own application letters for most professional settings. So let's talk then about what an application letter does. So basically an application letter has three major responsibilities. So the first is to introduce the resume. So we'll see this as we look through this sample resume. One thing that you are going to want to do is refer to something in your resume, because this is going to point your reader to important things. You want to persuade your employer, your potential employer, to read your resume. This is fundamentally a persuasive letter, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. And then you want to request an interview. So we'll go back over the ADA structure in just a minute, but the last A in ADA, as you hopefully all remember, is action. So the action that you want your reader to take is fundamentally to offer you an interview. So again, this is a persuasive message. You want to be thinking about this in terms of the ADA structure specifically, but you also want to be thinking about ethos, pathos, and logos. So you want to be thinking about how you build your credibility and how you present yourself as a writer. You want to be thinking about your reader's emotions, your reader's needs, and their values, and you want to be providing and interpreting evidence to prove your claims. So the basic structure of an application letter, and this is actually not a bad way of sort of breaking up your paragraphs, because as you'll see, I recommend using a 4-paragraph structure for your application letter. So you can use the ADA structure to organize those paragraphs. So the first A is attention. You want to get the reader's interest by telling them something about you that's important, whether that's your education, whether that's a key piece of experience, something like this, something that's going to make them interested in you in the context of their company. We'll keep coming back to that. Then you want to build the reader's interest in the subject itself. So remember here, with I and D being desire, we've got a fairly intertwined component, or two fairly intertwined components rather. When we're talking about building their interest, you're providing information about the subject itself. So in this case, that would be you as a job seeker. So you're providing more information about, again, something like your education or your previous work experience, previous professional experience, activities that you've been involved in, whatever it is. Something that makes you stand out and makes you qualified. Then you want to evoke desire. And so what this focuses on, remember, is that is the way in which hiring you would be beneficial to their company. And this is the really, really key thing with an application letter, is they are not looking to hire you out of the goodness of their hearts. They're looking to hire the person who's going to be most beneficial for them. So this is one of our basic principles of business writing, is adopting a you-centered perspective, or a reader-centered perspective. Why would hiring you benefit this company? What would you bring to them? And then lastly, you're going to give the reader concrete actions to take. So this would be your specific request for an interview with contact information. So we'll see this as we move into this sample application letter from Dalton Smith. So if we look at the opening, this is where Smith gains the reader's attention. He writes, "Dear hiring manager, Sea Air Global Transport consistently appeared as a top transportation firm in the research I did for my senior project in global supply chain management, so imagine my delight when I discovered the opening for an export pricing analyst in your Tacoma headquarters, position code T23/6678. With a major in business and a minor in statistical methods, my education has been ideal preparation for the challenges of this position." So, some of the things that Smith is doing here that work really well. He's expressing interest in the job, which shows why he's writing. This is an almost universally used technique. Within the first sentence, 2 sentences at the absolute most, you want to tell the reader that you are writing to apply for X position. I am writing to apply for whatever position it is. That's one of the main things that this opening paragraph needs to do. There's disagreement about whether or not you need to tell them where you saw the job posted. Some people say that's something that you really need to include. For me, I'm more of the school that says it doesn't matter that much where you saw the position advertised, because the position is the position regardless of where it was advertised. But one of the things that Smith has done here that's really good is included the position code. So if there's a job number or a posting number or a position number or something like that, that's actually a really useful thing to include, because a lot of times companies are hiring multiple people for multiple jobs, and so the more specific you can be about the particular position you're applying for, the easier it's going to make it for them to figure out. The other thing that Smith does in this opening paragraph, and this is really the attention section, is he introduces what makes him a potentially good employee. So he gives us some credentials, gives us some background that would make him a good fit for the company. And this is in the second sentence here, where he says, "With a major in business and a minor in statistical methods, my education has been ideal preparation for the challenges of this position." Now, one thing that I would often recommend doing, especially at a school like Penn State, is to mention the name of the university. So if you're in the Smeal College here at Penn State, I would say, "With a major in business from the Smeal College of Business at Pennsylvania State University," and you want to spell that all the way out, Pennsylvania State University, not just Penn State, because that's going to give the reader carry weight. That's going to give the reader a positive impression of you, and so you want that in the attention grabber. But the key thing here is in this second sentence, Smith has given us something concrete about him, his major and minor, his education, that makes him a good fit for the job. And so that's what's going to get the reader's attention and keep them reading. As we move on, the other thing, again, here is that Smith is focused primarily on the company and the job. Again, that's a thing that you want to continue doing. You want that you-centered approach, that reader-centered approach. As we move on to the middle two paragraphs of this letter, this is where he creates interest and he evokes desire. So there's more discussion here of Smith's skills and experience. And one of the things that you'll notice if you look through these paragraphs is that every skill he mentions is tied to a specific experience that proves that he has that. So if we look at this first paragraph, in fact, my senior project demonstrates most of the skills in your job description, including written communication skills, analytical abilities, and math aptitude. My senior project. So this is the concrete experience that Smith has that demonstrates he's got these skills. So this is something that you want to be doing, is pointing us back to experiences and then outcomes as well. So what have you done and how was it successful? That's the meat and potatoes of the interest and desire paragraphs. The other thing, again, is he's focusing here on the company. He's focusing on what they're asking for. So, again, we can look back at that first sentence. Most of the skills listed in your job description. This is the kind of thing that you want to be doing. If you look at the second half of this second paragraph here, he says, I want to start my professional career with a company that truly values the customer. In reviewing your website and reading several articles on Lloyd's List and other trade websites, I'm impressed by Sea Air's constant attention to customer service in this highly competitive industry. So, he's identified their characteristics, their values, the things that they do well, and he's checked those with other places. So he's given us a sense of that he knows this industry and he knows whose opinions matter. And so Smith is tying his skills, tying his qualifications to this company in particular. And so I want to emphasize this especially. The basic formula for an application letter is you want X, here's evidence I can provide X. You want to be following that basic model throughout the letter. You want X, here's evidence I can provide X. And the other thing that we see here that I think is really worth noting is at the top of this third paragraph, the second paragraph of this section, where he says, as you can see from my resume. That's a really good gesture, because again, one of the things you want your application letter to do is to point your reader to the resume and highlight things that they should be taking note of. So the resume gives the reader a snapshot of you. This is where you get to highlight pieces of that snapshot that are most important. So I would say it's a good strategy most of the time to have a phrase like, as you can see from my resume, or as my resume shows. My resume, to expand on something in my resume, a phrase like this that's pointing us to some place in that other document, or pointing readers to some place in that other document. So as we move on to the last section, this is a very formulaic section, but it's a crucial section. So this is your action request. In Smith's version, he writes, "My verbal communication skills would be best demonstrated in an interview, of course. I would be happy to meet with a representative of your company at their earliest convenience. I can be reached at daltonksmith@gmail.com or by phone at the phone number." So the two sort of key things here, one is to request the job interview. In his second sentence here, Smith said, "I'd be happy to meet with a representative of your company at their earliest convenience." So that's the request. And the other thing is to give the reader the specific contact information that they need to follow up on this. This information is going to be on your resume, but you should repeat it here in the conclusion of your cover letter, because that's going to make it more accessible for readers. So in this case, we've got Smith's email address and phone number. I would recommend putting both of those into the conclusion of your application letter, because again, that's going to give your reader options for how they can contact you. The other thing that you may do is give a list of times that you're available or not available. So as much as possible, you want to be available during business hours, but that's not necessarily always feasible. A lot of jobs nowadays will email, which makes it a lot easier to respond when you have the time to do it. But if they want to call you, or they want to set up a phone interview or something like that, giving them a sense of your availability is going to make that a lot easier for them. So, some things that you want to do in your application letter to be successful. As we discussed in both the critically reading job ads video and the tailoring resumes video, you want to use keywords from the job ad within this letter. So key verbs, key nouns especially. Things that maybe show up multiple times in the job call. You want those same words or phrases to show up in your letter. You want to provide some evidence that you understand the company, the position, and the industry. So when Smith talked about researching this company on Lloyd's List and elsewhere, that was what he was doing. That's what that gesture is. He says, I know whose opinions carry weight in this industry, and I know what kinds of things the industry is concerned with. So that's a really strong gesture to show that you're a professional. This is sometimes a very challenging thing to do, but you want your letter to be personal. Not just in the sense that it's talking about you, but you want it to reflect your individual personality, but you also want to remain professional. So you want semi-formal writing, not fully formal because you are using first person here, but you want to be respectful, you want to avoid contractions, you want to avoid slang, things like this, while still giving us a glimpse of what makes you an individual. You want to be confident that you deserve this job, or at least you deserve an interview for this job. This is a challenging balance because, as we'll see in just a few minutes on the list of things not to do, you don't want to sound overconfident. And there's actually a moment in the first paragraph of Dalton Smith's letter where I think he's on the line there, when he says, my education has made me an ideal candidate for this job, or I forget what his exact phrasing is. I would be very cautious about saying I'm an ideal fit, or I'm a perfect fit, or I'm whatever it is, because that's an assessment that your reader is actively making. And if you say, I think that I'm an ideal candidate, and they say, I'm not sure that you are, that can weaken your case. So you want to develop a careful balance here about how you project confidence. And part of the way that you want to do this is by focusing on your successes, focusing on achievements. Along with that, you're going to expand on information from the resume. So if something is not on your resume, generally I wouldn't talk about it in the application letter, but what the application letter gets to do is to explain how the things that you've done that are listed on your resume make you a good fit for this job. So that's one of the ways that you can project confidence, is by showing how your experiences, your background, your work history, your education, whatever it is, how these things make you a good fit for the job, a good candidate. In terms of the address for the letter, if you can, you want to address this letter to a specific individual. If not, you want to find the appropriate position, whether that's a hiring manager, whether that's head of human resources, whether that's the president of the company, whoever it is, whatever job title it is that does the hiring, that's your backup address. Talk about who to avoid addressing in just a minute when we get to the don'ts. But that's going to be more personal if you address a specific person or even a job title. In terms of length, application letters should be concise. For most professional settings, your application letter should be 1 page or less. Again, I recommend using 4 fairly brief paragraphs going through the ADA structure, and then the heading and the closing of the business letter format. The thing you want to remember with applications is that they may be looking at hundreds of applications for this position, and so the longer your application letter is, the more work you're creating for them. And generally, people would prefer to do less work rather than more. So if you can give them 1 page rather than, say, 2 pages, or you definitely don't want to go to 2.5, but if you can give them 1 page, concise, tightly written letter, that's going to be more respectful of their time, and they're going to be happier with that. If there are gaps in your experience that you feel the need to explain, you can do that tactfully, although generally I would recommend avoiding that. I would generally say, if there are weaknesses in your application or application materials, they will find them without you pointing them out. But if there's something that, some sort of extenuating circumstance that can explain, say, a lengthy period where you were unemployed, or something like that, you can do that here. And then the last thing you want to make sure that you do is proofread very carefully, and this goes both for cover letters and for resumes. Check this over and over and over and over and over again. You want to make sure that this is as perfect as you possibly can get it. I would also suggest having other people proofread it for you. If an employer has, say, 200 applications for a job, they are going to be using anything they can to skim that down. And so, while it's unfair and it's not necessarily a good way of deciding who is and isn't a good job candidate, if you have errors in your application materials, that is something that employers will sometimes use to discount your application materials. So you want this to be perfect. Things to avoid with application letters. Be careful about gimmicks. Be careful about things that look cute but lack any real substance. I think we get one of these in Dalton Smith's letter. It's on the fence, on the verge of being clever, but I'm not sure that it quite is. In his last paragraph where he says, "My verbal communication skills would best be demonstrated in an interview, of course." It's a little bit quirky, it's a little bit interesting, but at the same time, I'm not sure that it really lands all that well. So you want to be cautious about that sort of overly quirky, sort of carnival trick kind of writing. One of the absolute worst mistakes that you can make, and this is always a temptation with application letters, is to focus exclusively on yourself. Remember, the key thing here is not here's who I am for my own sake. It's here's what I would bring to your company. Again, they're not interested in hiring you for your benefit. They're interested in hiring the best person for their benefit. So, the question that you always want to be very clearly answering is, you, the company, would benefit from hiring me because I bring X skills, I bring X experience, I bring X knowledge to your company. And so it's always about what's going to be best for the company. Once again, you don't want to sound arrogant or overconfident, and this is particularly an issue if you are a university student or a new graduate or something like that. If you don't have a large amount of professional experience to back up that confidence, readers will pick up on that. And so that's something that you can be that you can be sure that it will turn readers off. If you come across as arrogant, if you come across as overconfident, if you say things like, I would be the perfect fit for this job, I'm an ideal candidate, my qualifications are excellent, and things like that, especially if they're not, that's going to show a low degree of self-awareness, and that is something that employers are going to want. So you want to give an honest assessment of yourself, presenting yourself as positively as you reasonably can. You will avoid just restating information from the resume, so every point that you make in the application letter should be expanded upon. We saw this with the things that you want to do. You want to make sure you're going beyond just giving us the same information we could get from the resume itself. This is one of my pet peeves. There's still an older school who accept this or maybe even like it, but the phrase "to whom it may concern" should just be cut out of your writing forever. It is an extremely impersonal salutation. The phrase "to whom it may concern" suggests I was not invested enough, I didn't care enough to try and figure out who I was actually writing to. And so I've just written to the world, and I don't care who it goes to. And so readers who want tailored application materials are not going to respond well to that. Don't bring up salary unless the job ad specifically asks you to. Sometimes job ads will say, give us your preferred salary. This can be very this can be a way for them to skim out people who have unreasonable, from their perspective, expectations. So if they're planning to pay someone $45,000 a year for a job and you ask for 70, that may be the thing that doesn't get you the job. On the other hand, if they were planning to pay 70 and you ask for 45, they may say, aha, this person has no idea how much money they're losing out on by not asking for more. So salary is a very, very tricky thing, and there are resources that you can use to try and figure out what other people in similar companies in the same geographic area are making in comparable jobs. But generally you want to avoid bringing up salary. You want to, for the most part, leave that for the negotiations phase where you're working out your contract. One thing that some students, especially, but other early career job applicants, are tempted to do is to point out qualifications that they don't meet. This often takes the form of phrases like, although I don't have 2 years of professional experience, I have X. Delete that phrase. Delete any phrases like that. And the reason you want to delete them is that they are not going to strengthen your position. Like I said, any qualification that you do not have, employers will be aware of that. They will figure that out. So you don't need to point out to them that you haven't done X thing that they've asked for. They will know. And then they will make the determination for themselves whether or not that qualification is make or break. You don't want to do that work for them. You want to give yourself the best chance of getting this job by focusing on the qualifications that you do have. And then finally, do not forget to proofread carefully. I was giving you a few seconds of silence there to laugh at the misspelling of proofread in the final bullet point here, which I assume you all noticed and found hilarious. Again, it's not necessarily fair and it's not necessarily a good system, but we judge people disproportionately on what we believe to be correct grammar and mechanics. So you want to be aware of that, and you want to make your application materials as pristinely correct as you possibly can. So proofread them several times yourself, have friends, colleagues, teachers, whoever it is, proofread them, make sure they are perfect. So that's what you want to do to tailor your application materials, or to tailor your application letter.